The concept of a mobile, lightly armored, and heavily armed tank destroyer first emerged in the 1930s. However, it was not until mid-1940 that the United States Army fully recognized its strategic importance, following Germany's rapid and successful invasion of France. Despite being numerically inferior, German tanks broke through French defenses by employing concentrated lightning-fast attacks. Observing the speed with which Allied lines collapsed, American military planners concluded that the United States had to prepare itself for this new form of warfare. In response, the Army began pursuing the development of a dedicated tank destroyer force. Two early 3-inch or 76mm tank destroyer prototypes, the Gun Motor Carriage T56 and T57, were developed for this force in late 1942. Both were based on the chassis of the newly introduced M3A3 light tank and were armed with a 76mm gun. Testing, however, revealed serious design shortcomings, and as a result, both projects were abandoned in February 1943. After years of fruitless debate, work on the Field Manual 18-5, Tank Destroyer Field Manual, Organization and Tactics of Tank Destroyer Units, finally commenced in January 1941. This manual became the first authoritative guide to American tank destroyer doctrine, and formally defined the essential characteristics such vehicles were expected to possess. Although some of its ideas would appear contradictory or outdated by 1942, FM 18-5 played a decisive role in shaping the development of U.S. tank destroyers and exerted a lasting influence on the design of numerous vehicles, both famous and obscure. The manual characterized tank destroyers as, quote, offensively defensive weapons. While highly effective at destroying enemy armor, they were not intended to spearhead anything. Instead, their role was defined as a mobile reserve force, positioned behind the front lines. In both defensive and offensive operations, tank destroyer units were to remain on standby, and ready to rapidly respond to enemy breakthroughs or armored counterattacks. What defined a tank destroyer unit was their combination of mobility and powerful armor-piercing firepower, offset by relatively light armor protection. Tank destroyer formations were also expected to possess strong defensive measures against air attack and a high degree of operational flexibility, enabled by extensive radio and command equipment. Guided by these principles, General Andrew Bruce, a leading advocate for self-propelled anti-tank guns within the War Department, and the head of the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center, outlined his vision for the, quote, ideal tank destroyer in February 1942. According to Bruce's criteria, the vehicle would prioritize mobility, lightweight design, cost efficiency, ease of maintenance, and have a crew of 5 and a 3-inch gun as its main armament. Among the various projects that emerged, 2 stood out as meeting the criteria, at least in theory. These involved utilizing the newly introduced, simple, and cheap M3A3 light tank. Eager to capitalize on the latest advancements in tank technology, the Ordnance Committee quickly proposed 2 new 3-inch gun motor carriages based on the M3A3's chassis. Both designs were intended to remain as similar as possible, with the primary distinction between them being a choice of power plant. Both vehicles were to be designed and produced by the American Car and Foundry Company. The first vehicle, designated as the 3-inch Gun Motor Carriage T56, was to be powered by a Continental W670 engine. This engine closely resembled the standard power plant of the M3A3, which significantly expedited prototype production, letting it be tested early. The second one was equipped with the more robust radial Wright 975C1 engine, offering greater performance potential. This was the Gun Motor Carriage T57. The T56's Continental W670 Series 12 engine delivered 288 horsepower at 2600 RPM. Despite its weight of 14.5 tons, the T56 achieved a respectable top speed of 40 miles per hour, or about 63 kilometers per hour. However, its limited fuel capacity of 50 gallons, a little less than 200 liters, restricted its cruising range to just 70 miles. But the T57 had its more powerful Wright 975C1 engine. While this upgrade increased the vehicle's weight to 15 tons, the engine produced an impressive 400 horsepower at 2400 RPM. This improvement allowed the T57 to reach an outstanding top speed of 50 miles per hour, or 80 kilometers per hour. Unfortunately, it shared the same modest fuel capacity as the T56, meaning it also had restricted operational range. Both the T56 and T57 were armed with the 3-inch gun M7, a weapon originally developed for anti-aircraft use but later adapted as a primary armament for several armored fighting vehicles. Most notably, it would go on to equip the 3-inch Gun Motor Carriage M10, one of the US Army's standard tank destroyers, as well as the M6 heavy tank. The M7 gun could fire a wide range of ammunition, including the M62 armor-piercing capped ballistic capped round, M93 high-velocity armor-piercing round, M79 armor-piercing, and M42A1 high-explosive. When firing APCBC rounds, the M7 could penetrate up to 93mm of rolled homogeneous armor slanted back at 30 degrees at a range of 500 yards, or about 450 meters. This was more than enough to beat any Axis tank in 1942. When it's used on the T56 and T57, the M7 gun featured a horizontal traverse range of 15 degrees to either side and a vertical movement ranging from -5 to 25 degrees of elevation. Due to the unconventional placement of the hand cranks, 2 crew members were required to work in tandem to elevate and traverse the gun. The vehicle could store up to 40 rounds of ammunition housed in a box at the rear. There were also plans to equip the vehicle with a 7.62mm anti-aircraft machine gun. However, these plans were never realized. Additionally, each vehicle was intended to carry 2 M1 carbines along with 100 rounds of ammunition for the crew's personal protection. Mounting a large gun on such a compact chassis required a significant redesign of the M383's hull. The only feasible solution was a turretless design, with the 3-inch gun mounted on a pedestal at the rear of the chassis. This arrangement had the additional advantage of reducing the gun's forward overhang. To make this layout possible, the engine compartment was moved from its original position to the center of the hull, directly behind the driver's compartment. To provide workspace for the gun crew, a folding metal platform was installed in front of the ammunition box at the rear of the vehicle. When in firing position, the platform could be unfolded and used as a loading station. During transit, it was folded upright to save space. The seating arrangement for the rest of the crew during movement remains unclear, though it is reasonable to assume they would have traveled in an accompanying light vehicle, following behind the tank destroyer. The armor protection of both the T56 and T57 was unremarkable. Generally speaking, they had enough armor to defend against heavy machine gun fire and maybe smaller anti-tank projectiles at a distance. However, direct hits from anything larger than 37mm would easily take these vehicles out. Their hull armor was comparable to that of the standard M3A3, with a 25mm or 1-inch thick front plate sloped at 48 degrees from the vertical. The gun shield on the T56 was 38mm or about 1.5 inches thick at the front, slanted approximately 30 degrees from the vertical, while the rear of the vehicle was completely unprotected. The T57 had no gun shield at all, leaving the crew completely exposed. Both tank destroyers were operated by a crew of 5. The driver was positioned on the front left with the assistant driver on the front right. At the rear of the vehicle, the gunner stood to the left of the gun, the loader stood directly behind it, and the commander was positioned to the right of the gun. One of the most significant drawbacks of both projects was their poor layout. The whole crew had little room to maneuver and were positioned directly in front of a substantial fire hazard. The situation was worse for the gun crew, who were at best only partially protected by the vehicle's armor as they operated the weapon in an exposed position at the rear. In practical terms, this left them highly vulnerable to shrapnel or even small arms fire, not to mention how they had to travel in a separate light vehicle. Overall, crew comfort and survivability were clearly secondary considerations in both designs. Once completed, the T56 was delivered to Aberdeen Proving Ground on the 10th of November, 1942. Before testing began, several modifications were made to the vehicle. A gun sight was mounted to the left of the gun, and an expedient gun shield was installed to offer some protection for the gun crew. Although there were plans to mount the shield on both vehicles, only the T56 got one. Testing commenced, but the results were disappointing, as was reflected in the long list of deficiencies recorded during the trials. The engine's cooling system was inadequate, with parts of the engine reaching temperatures of up to 580 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 300 degrees Celsius, during automotive testing. The vehicle's poor weight distribution and cramped driving compartment made steering unnecessarily difficult. The T56's rearward center of gravity placed considerable strain on the idler wheel. The fuel tanks, positioned directly behind the driver and assistant driver, posed a serious fire hazard. Additionally, because the ammunition box was mounted directly in front of the engine compartment, even the smallest maintenance tasks required disassembling the entire vehicle. With a meager capacity of only 40 rounds, the stowage was deemed insufficient. The positioning of the hand wheels made it impossible for a single crew member to traverse and elevate the gun simultaneously. The gun shield was basically useless against anything not directly in front. And finally, when firing, the vehicle rocked violently, making rapid and accurate fire impossible. Aberdeen did have one good thing to say about the T56. its mobility. The vehicle could reach a top speed of 40 miles per hour in only 54 seconds, which was quite impressive for its time. However, this alone was not enough to make the T56 a viable tank destroyer. By December 1942, Aberdeen's official report concluded that an almost complete redesign would be necessary to make the T56 usable. This proposal, however, was deemed impractical given the potential strain on the engine, especially since another little prototype called the Hellcat was nearing completion. The T57 was finally delivered to Aberdeen Proving Ground on December 8, 1942, and testing began 9 days later. From the outset, it became apparent that the vehicle's more powerful engine provided noticeably improved overall driving performance compared to the T56. During tests from January 5th to January 11, 1943, the vehicle reached a top speed of approximately 50 miles per hour on paved roads and 30 miles per hour on softer dirt. However, concerns were raised about the brake hands, which would endure increased wear due to the stronger engine. These concerns proved valid when, during testing, one brake band snapped while the other showed significant wear. The cause of this failure was traced to issues with the transmission and oil pump, which caused excessive heat and insufficient lubrication. After the faulty components were replaced, testing resumed, but the outcome ultimately mirrored that of the T56. As the two vehicles shared many of the same fundamental design characteristics, they also suffered from many of the same problems. The problems with the firing platform and weight distribution remained unresolved, and access to the engine was made even more difficult. To perform even the smallest maintenance tasks, the entire engine would have to come out. By the time testing concluded, the T57 had accumulated almost 900 miles of driving between December 17, 1942 and April 13, 1943. On December 3, 1942, the Special Armored Vehicle Board, which was responsible for evaluating experimental armored vehicles, submitted its report on the T56. It was stated that none of the members of the board, representing the Armored Force, the Tank Destroyer Command, and Cavalry, supported the development of the T56 gun motor carriage going any further. In early February 1943, in light of the negative reports from both the Special Armored Vehicle Board and Aberdeen Proving Ground, the Ordnance Department recommended the cancellation of the T56 and T57. This recommendation was finalized on February 24, 1943, and the tank destroyers were ordered to remain at Aberdeen. The fate of the vehicles after this decision is unclear, although testing of the T57 continued until April 13, 1943, despite its cancellation. It is presumed that the T56 and T57, along with other prototype armored fighting vehicles from World War II, were scrapped at Aberdeen sometime in the late 1940s. This concludes our video on the 3-inch gun motor carriages T56 and T57. What are your thoughts on these US efforts to develop affordable and lightweight tank destroyers? Do you think the concept would have had more merit if the flaws were ironed out sooner? Let us know in the comments below. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider Patreon or PayPal, or checking out our sister channel, Plain Encyclopedia. As always, we want to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Dave Shuford, Sopwith21, Dan Fitzpatrick, Owen M., and R. Robb. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.